Jake Morrison led the three students to a private study room where they could talk without being overheard. He seemed relieved to finally drop the pretense of being just another exchange student, but his expression remained serious as he prepared to explain things that had been hidden from the galaxy for over 2 centuries. "Before I tell you about human warfare," he began, "I need to show you something about human history. My people have been fighting each other for thousands of years before we ever met another species." He activated the room's holographic display and began showing them records from Earth's past. The first images were of ancient human civilizations, Romans building massive walls and siege engines, Chinese generals writing detailed books about military strategy, and European knights developing new forms of armor and weapons. Crix studied the displays with fascination. "Your species developed very sophisticated military techniques even when confined to a single planet." "That is correct," Morrison replied. "But more importantly, look at how we approached each conflict." The images changed to show more recent human wars. They saw massive battles involving millions of soldiers, cities destroyed and rebuilt, and technology advancing rapidly under the pressure of military necessity. What struck the alien students was not the scale of destruction, but the complexity of the strategies involved. "Every other species we have studied fights for clear objectives," Morrison explained. "When the Valdorians fight the Nexari, they want to control specific star systems or trade routes. When the Draconians attacked smaller civilizations, they wanted slaves and tribute. You fight until the cost becomes too high, then you negotiate a settlement." Zeph's tentacles pulsed with confused colors. "This seems like the logical way to conduct warfare. What do humans do differently?" Morrison changed the display to show documentation from the Luna campaign, the first time humans had fought against galactic species. But these were not the censored reports the students had found in the archives. These were complete human military records with nothing hidden. "When the Zaltharian Empire attacked our system, they expected us to defend our planet and maybe some of our outer colonies," Morrison said. "They thought we would fight until the casualties became too high, then surrender or negotiate for better terms." The holographic display showed the early stages of the war. Zaltharian forces had indeed achieved initial success, capturing several human colonies and destroying parts of Earth's orbital defenses. Their admirals had sent demands for surrender, expecting the humans to recognize that further resistance was hopeless. "Instead, we did something the Zaltharians did not expect," Morrison continued. "We studied them." The display changed to show massive databases of information that human intelligence services had compiled about their enemies. Not just military data about ship configurations and weapon capabilities, but detailed cultural and psychological profiles of Zaltharian society. "We learned their language, their history, their religion, their art, their philosophy," Morrison explained. "We studied how they raised their children, what they valued most in their leaders, what fears kept them awake at night, and what dreams motivated them to expand across the galaxy." Mira's compound eyes reflected her growing unease. "Why would you need to know so much about their culture just to fight a war?" "Because we were not just fighting a war," Morrison replied quietly. "We were solving a problem." He showed them the next phase of human operations. Rather than simply building larger fleets to match Zaltharian numbers, human forces had developed entirely new forms of warfare. They used the cultural information they had gathered to create psychological operations that confused and demoralized Zaltharian commanders. Human ships would appear in Zaltharian systems and broadcast messages in perfect Zaltharian language, quoting from their religious texts and historical heroes, but twisting the meanings to suggest that the war was contrary to everything the Zaltharians claimed to believe in. "You made them doubt their own motivations for fighting," Crix observed, his crystalline skin turning darker as he processed this information. "That was only the beginning," Morrison said. "Watch what happened next." The record showed human forces doing something unprecedented in galactic warfare. Instead of fighting the Zaltharian military directly, they began infiltrating Zaltharian society at every level. Human agents, perfectly trained in Zaltharian culture and psychology, took positions as advisors, merchants, teachers, and even entertainers. Within months, ideas began spreading through Zaltharian civilization, suggestions that their empire had grown too large to govern effectively. Proposals for scientific research that would be more beneficial than military expansion. cultural movements that emphasized individual achievement over collective conquest. "You did not just defeat their military," Zeph said in amazement. "You changed their entire way of thinking." "We solved the problem permanently," Morrison confirmed. "The Zaltharian Empire attacked us because their culture valued military expansion and viewed other species as resources to be exploited. So we helped them develop a culture that valued scientific advancement and viewed other species as potential partners." The final records from the Luna campaign showed the transformation of Zaltharian society. Their military academies became research institutes. Their conquest fleets became exploration vessels. Their tribute-based economy became a knowledge-sharing network with other civilizations. Most disturbing of all, the Zaltharians were genuinely happy with these changes. They had not been forced to abandon their old ways. They had been convinced that the new ways were better. "They thanked us," Morrison said quietly. "The same species that had tried to enslave humanity ended up grateful that we had defeated them." Crix's crystalline form had turned almost completely transparent with shock. "This is not warfare. This is something else entirely." Morrison nodded grimly. "Now you begin to understand why the Galactic Council banned us from military conflicts." He showed them records from other human conflicts, the hegemony wars, the Draconian situation, and several smaller engagements. In every case, the pattern was identical. Humans would study their enemies with incredible thoroughness, develop strategies that targeted psychological and cultural weaknesses rather than just military ones, and then restructure enemy society so completely that former enemies became willing allies. The Draconian Empire had ruled through fear and military might for over 1,000 years, Morrison explained. "When they attacked our colonies, we could have simply built bigger weapons and fought them ship to ship. Instead, we convinced them that technological development was more efficient than conquest." The display showed how human advisors had gradually assumed positions throughout Draconian government and military structures, not through force or deception, but by genuinely helping the Draconians solve problems and improve their civilization. Within 2 years, the Draconian Empire had peacefully transformed into the Draconian Research Consortium, Morrison continued. They never realized they had been conquered because from their perspective they had simply evolved into something better. Mira's voice was barely a whisper. "You do not just win wars. You absorb entire civilizations. And we are very good at it," Morrison admitted. "Too good." He showed them the classified psychological evaluation that had led to humanity's exclusion from galactic warfare. The report, compiled by the galaxy's greatest xenopsychologists, reached a unanimous conclusion that chilled the 3 students to their cores. Humans do not view warfare as an extension of politics or economics. They view it as problem-solving, and humans have an obsessive drive to solve problems completely and permanently. The report identified 3 phases that occur in every human conflict, Morrison explained. First, we adapt tactically far faster than other species can counter. Second, we gather comprehensive intelligence about our enemies' psychology and culture. Third, we restructure their society to eliminate the conditions that made conflict necessary in the first place. Zeph's tentacles had turned a sickly gray color. What does this mean for the rest of the galaxy? Morrison's expression became even more serious. The Galactic Council realized something that terrified them. If humans were allowed to participate in regular galactic warfare, within a few centuries there would be no more galactic warfare. "Because everyone would be dead?" Crix asked fearfully. "No," Morrison replied. "Because everyone would be human." The 3 students stared at him in horror as the full implications became clear. Humans did not conquer through force or fear. They conquered through understanding. They made their enemies want to become like them, and they were extraordinarily effective at it. The ban was not put in place to protect the galaxy from human aggression, Morrison explained. It was put in place to preserve the diversity of galactic civilization itself. He showed them the Council's final analysis. If humans were allowed to participate in galactic conflicts, their natural problem-solving approach would gradually transform every species they encountered. Not through violence or oppression, but through genuine improvement of their societies. The result would be a galaxy where every civilization had been influenced by human methods of thinking and organizing. Different species might retain their biological forms. The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal towers of Zentara Prime. as students from across the galaxy hurried toward their classes at the military academy. Crix walked carefully on his four legs, his crystalline skin catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns on the walls around him. His backpack felt heavy with data tablets and study materials for another day of learning about warfare and strategy. Behind him, Zeph floated just above the ground, using the natural gas sacs in his body to glide smoothly through the corridors. His tentacles moved in excited patterns, changing colors from deep blue to bright yellow as he thought about the day ahead. Both students had been looking forward to Professor Galt's Advanced Tactical Studies class for weeks. The classroom was already half full when they arrived. Students from dozens of different worlds sat at specially designed desks that could accommodate various body types. There were the insect-like Thessians with their 6 arms and compound eyes, the tall plant-like Verdani who absorbed sunlight through their green skin, and the floating energy beings called Lux who communicated through light patterns. Mira waved at them with 3 of her 6 arms as they found seats near her. She was one of the brightest students in their year, and her compound eyes could process information faster than most computer systems. Her purple exoskeleton gleamed under the classroom lights as she organized her notes with precise movements. Professor Galt entered the room exactly on time, as he always did. The ancient Corthani was over 300 years old, and his gray carapace showed the scars of many battles from his younger days as a warrior. His 4 eyes moved independently as he scanned the room, making sure every student was paying attention. "Today we will study the current military zones of our galaxy," he announced in his deep, rumbling voice. With a gesture of his clawed hand, he activated the holographic projector in the center of the room. A 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, rotating slowly so all students could see every sector. The map was beautiful and complex, showing trade routes in blue, military zones in red, and neutral territories in green. Different colors marked the territories of various species and empires. The Draconian Research Consortium occupied a large section in the outer rim, shown in silver. The Nexari Federation spread across several spiral arms in bright gold. The Valdorian Republic appeared as clusters of purple dots near the galactic core. Crick studied the map carefully, noting the strategic positions of different civilizations. He had always been good at understanding military tactics, and he hoped to become a fleet commander someday. The way different species had arranged their territories showed clear defensive and offensive patterns. Zeph's tentacles pulsed with excitement as he absorbed the information. His people, the Nexari, were natural strategists, and seeing the big picture of galactic politics made his mind race with possibilities. He could already imagine the complex web of alliances and rivalries that must exist between all these different worlds. But Mira noticed something odd about the display. In one section of the galaxy there was a gray area with no markings at all. It was not small either. It covered several star systems, including one marked only as Sol. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she raised one of her arms to ask a question. "Professor Galt, what is that gray area? Why are those systems not marked like all the others?" The professor's 4 eyes all focused on her at once, and his mandibles clicked nervously. For a moment he seemed to struggle with how to answer. The entire class turned to look at the unmarked region, and murmurs of curiosity filled the room. "That region," Professor Galt said slowly, "contains a species known as humans. They come from the 3rd planet of the Sol system. These beings are subject to Galactic Council Resolution 847 Alpha, which permanently prohibits their participation in any sanctioned military conflicts." The students exchanged confused glances. Every species they had studied so far had some role in galactic warfare, even if it was just providing supplies or serving as neutral mediators. Why would one species be completely excluded? A Lux student pulsed with bright yellow light, their way of asking a question. Are they too primitive for modern warfare? Do they lack the technology to be useful allies? Professor Galt's mandibles clicked again, faster this time. No, they are not primitive. Their technology is quite advanced in many ways. Crix leaned forward in his seat. Then are they pacifists who refuse to fight? Some species have religious beliefs against violence. They are not pacifists, the professor replied, and his voice carried a strange tone that none of the students had heard before. Zeph's tentacles turned a worried shade of orange. Are they too aggressive? Too violent to be trusted in coalition forces? The professor was quiet for a long moment. His 4 eyes looked at each student in turn, as if he was trying to decide how much to tell them. Finally, he spoke again. The humans are restricted from galactic warfare not because they are too weak or too peaceful or too violent. They are restricted because they are too effective. The classroom fell completely silent. No one understood what that could possibly mean. How could being too good at something be a reason to ban someone from doing it? Mira raised another arm. What do you mean by too effective, Professor? But Professor Galt was already shutting down the holographic display. The beautiful galaxy map faded away, taking with it the mysterious gray zone and all its unanswered questions. That is enough discussion of this topic, he said firmly. Class is dismissed early today. Please read chapters 12 through 15 in your tactical analysis textbooks before our next meeting. The students sat in stunned silence as their professor packed up his materials and left the room without another word. In all their time at the academy, none of them had ever seen him end a class early or refuse to answer questions about military history. As they gathered their belongings, Crix, Zeph, and Mira found themselves walking together toward the dormitory complex. None of them spoke until they were far away from the classroom, but all three were thinking the same thoughts. That was very strange, Mira finally said, her compound eyes reflecting her confusion. Why would Professor Galt not want to discuss those humans? Crix's crystalline skin had turned a darker shade, the way it always did when he was deep in thought. He seemed almost afraid to talk about them. But afraid of what? Zeph's tentacles were still showing worried colors. Did you see how he reacted when we asked questions? It was like he knew things he did not want to tell us. They reached the dormitory and found a quiet corner, where they could talk without being overheard by other students. The three friends had been study partners since their first year at the academy, and they often helped each other understand difficult concepts. I think we should find out more about these humans, Mira said quietly. If they are important enough to be banned from all galactic warfare, we should know why. Crix nodded agreement. The professor said they were too effective. That makes no sense. Since when is being good at something a problem? Zeph's tentacles began to pulse with the excited patterns that meant he had an idea. I might be able to access some of the restricted databases in the Academy library. My people have natural abilities with quantum computer systems. That could be dangerous, Mira warned. If those files are restricted, there must be good reasons. But how can we learn to be good military officers if we do not understand all aspects of galactic warfare? Crix asked. This seems like important information they are keeping from us. The three friends looked at each other and came to a silent agreement. Whatever secrets the humans held, whatever made them too effective for galactic warfare, they were going to find out. The mystery was too interesting to ignore, and their curiosity was stronger than their caution. That night, after most of the other students had gone to sleep, they would begin their investigation into the forbidden species from the Sol system. The Academy library was almost empty at midnight. Only a few dedicated students remained at the study terminals, their various forms of lighting casting strange shadows between the towering shelves of data crystals and quantum storage devices. Crix, Zeph, and Mira had waited until this late hour to begin their forbidden research. Zeph approached one of the advanced computer terminals near the back of the library. His tentacles began to glow with a soft blue light as he connected directly to the quantum processing core. The Nexari had evolved this ability over millions of years, allowing them to interface with computer systems in ways that other species needed special equipment to achieve. I am accessing the restricted archives now, he whispered to his friends. The security is very complex, but I think I can find a way through. Mira positioned herself to watch for any approaching librarians or security guards. Her compound eyes could see in multiple directions at once, making her an excellent lookout. Crix stood ready to help analyze whatever information they might find. The first search for humans returned thousands of results, but most were heavily censored. Black bars covered entire paragraphs and whole sections were marked with warnings about classified information. Even basic facts about their biology and culture were restricted at levels far above what Academy students could access. Try searching for specific events, Crix suggested. Professor Galt mentioned something about them being too effective in warfare. Zeph's tentacles moved in complex patterns as he navigated through layers of security. Finally, he found a database of historical military conflicts that had slightly lower security restrictions. Most of the files were still censored, but some details had been declassified over time. Here is something, he said quietly. The Luna campaign. It happened about 200 years ago. The file that appeared on the screen was frustratingly incomplete, but it contained enough information to make all three students stare in amazement. According to the records, a species called the Zaltharian Empire had attacked the Sol system, expecting an easy victory over what appeared to be a single-planet civilization. The war had lasted 18 months. The Zaltharians had committed over 4 million soldiers and support staff to the invasion. They brought advanced weapons, experienced commanders, and a fleet that had conquered dozens of other worlds. But the outcome made no sense at all. The final casualty reports showed that the Zaltharian Empire had been completely destroyed as a political entity. Over 3 million of their soldiers were listed as casualties. Their entire military infrastructure had been dismantled. Their homeworld had been occupied and their government replaced. Human casualties were listed as 12,000 dead and 37,000 wounded. "This cannot be correct," Mira said, studying the numbers carefully. How could a single planet defeat a galactic empire with such low losses? Crix's crystalline skin had turned almost transparent with shock. "Look at this part. It says the humans did not just defend their system, they counterattacked and conquered the entire Zaltharian territory." Zeph found another file, this one about something called the Siege of Arcturus Station. Again, the numbers seemed impossible. Human forces numbering only 12,000 had faced a combined enemy fleet of over 2 million. The result was complete human victory with minimal losses on their side. "Maybe these are translation errors," Mira suggested hopefully. "Perhaps the computer systems are not converting the casualty figures correctly." But as they dug deeper into the archives, they found more examples. The hegemony wars showed similar patterns. The Draconian conflict had the same impossible ratios. Every time humans fought other species, the results were overwhelming victories that made no tactical sense. More disturbing were some of the notes written by military analysts who had studied these conflicts. One report mentioned unprecedented tactical adaptability and strategic thinking that exceeds known parameters. Another referred to psychological warfare techniques that appear to be instinctive rather than learned. The most chilling document they found was a brief psychological evaluation of human prisoners captured during the early stages of the Luna campaign. The Zaltharian scientists who examined them had written, "These beings do not think about warfare in ways we understand. They appear to view conflict not as a means to achieve goals, but as a problem to be solved permanently." "What does that mean?" Crix wondered aloud. "How do you solve warfare permanently?" Before anyone could answer, Zeph's tentacles suddenly turned bright red with alarm. "Someone is coming," he hissed. "I need to disconnect from the system now." They quickly shut down the terminal and pretended to be studying normal textbooks as a security guard walked past. The Korthani guard nodded politely at them and continued his rounds, unaware of what they had been researching. After the guard was gone, they moved to a different part of the library to discuss what they had learned. None of them could make sense of the information they had found. "Every species we have studied fights for logical reasons," Mira said quietly. "Territory, resources, trade routes, political influence. But these humans seem to fight differently. The casualty ratios are impossible unless they have weapons far beyond anything we know about," Crix added. "But the reports do not mention superior technology. They talk about tactics and psychology." Zeph was still shaken by what they had discovered. "That note about solving warfare permanently disturbs me. What kind of species thinks that way?" Over the next several days, they continued their research whenever they could find time. The picture that emerged was confusing and frightening. Humans appeared to be physically similar to several other species, not particularly strong or fast or durable. Their technology was advanced, but not impossibly so. What made them different was how they approached conflict. Every battle report mentioned the same patterns. Human forces would study their enemies carefully, learning about their cultures and psychology as much as their military capabilities. Then they would develop tactics specifically designed to exploit not just physical weaknesses, but mental and cultural ones as well. But the most disturbing pattern was what happened after human victories. Other species would fight wars, win or lose, and then negotiate peace treaties. The defeated would rebuild their forces and maybe try again later. This was how galactic warfare had worked for thousands of years. Humans did not do this. When they won wars, their enemies seemed to disappear as independent civilizations. The Zaltharian Empire became the Zaltharian Research Collective, a peaceful organization dedicated to scientific advancement. The hegemony forces became the Democratic Alliance and started working with their former human enemies as close partners. It is like they do not just defeat other species, Mira observed. They change them into something completely different. The breakthrough in their research came when Zeph discovered that there was actually a human at the academy. Hidden in the student records listed as a Terran anthropologist studying alien cultures was someone named Jake Morrison. Terra was listed as his home planet, but a cross-reference search revealed that Terra was simply another name for Sol 3. There is a human here, right now studying alongside us, Crick said in amazement. He has been here for almost a full semester. They found Morrison's class schedule and discovered he had been attending several of the same lectures they had, including Professor Galt's Tactical Studies course. Somehow he had been sitting in the same room when they had asked about the restricted gray zone on the galactic map. We need to talk to him, Mira decided. He might be able to explain what we have been reading about. But what if he is dangerous? Zeph worried. Everything we have learned suggests that humans are incredibly effective at warfare. He is one person, and we are students at a military academy, Crix pointed out. Besides, if humans were directly dangerous to individuals, they would not be allowed to visit our worlds at all. They spent 2 days working up the courage to approach Morrison. Finally, they found him in the academy's garden area, sitting alone and reading from a data tablet. He looked completely ordinary, about average height for a humanoid species with brown hair and brown eyes. Nothing about him suggested the incredible military capabilities they had been reading about. "Excuse me," Mira said politely as they approached. "Are you Jake Morrison from Terra?" The human looked up at them with a calm expression. For a moment he seemed to be deciding what to say, then his face changed slightly and they saw what might have been relief. "Yes, I am," he said quietly, "and I think I know what you want to ask me about." "We have been researching your species," Crix admitted. "We found some very confusing information in the military archives." Morrison closed his data tablet and looked at each of them carefully. "You want to know why humans are forbidden from galactic warfare?" "The professor said you were too effective," Zeph said. "But that makes no sense. How can being good at something be a problem?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, and his expression became very serious. "The truth is not pleasant," he said finally. "For anyone. Are you sure you want to know?" The three friends looked at each other. They had come too far in their investigation to stop now. "Yes," Mira answered for all of them. "We want to know the truth." Morrison nodded slowly. Morrison continued accessing classified human military files, showing the three students examples that made their understanding of human warfare even more disturbing. Each conflict revealed the same terrifying pattern of complete cultural transformation, disguised as military victory. "Let me show you the hegemony wars," Morrison said, calling up new holographic displays. This was when humanity fought 7 different species simultaneously across 43 star systems. The scale alone was staggering. Crix, Zeph, and Mira watched in amazement as the records showed human forces somehow managing separate campaigns against completely different types of enemies, each requiring entirely different approaches. The Empathi were highly emotional beings who made decisions based on feelings rather than logic, Morrison explained. So we developed psychological warfare techniques that made them feel guilty about their aggressive actions. We sent them art, music, and poetry that showed the suffering their wars caused to innocent beings. The records showed empathy commanders receiving human cultural transmissions and gradually becoming unable to order attacks because the emotional weight of causing pain became unbearable to them. Their entire military structure collapsed not from defeat in battle, but from internal moral crisis. The machinist collective valued technological superiority above all else, Morrison continued. They believed that the species with the best machines should naturally rule over others, so we simply built better machines than they had. But the human approach had been far more sophisticated than just superior engineering. They had studied machinist psychology and realized that these beings needed to feel that their technology was the best to maintain social cohesion. So humans had publicly shared advanced designs with the machinists, allowing them to build the improvements themselves. Within a year, the machinists were using human-designed technology and praising human engineering principles, Morrison said. They became our strongest allies because they genuinely believed we were the most advanced species they had ever encountered. Zeph's tentacles were pulsing with worried orange patterns. You made them want to follow you by giving them exactly what their culture valued most. And the Eternal Dynasty presented a different challenge entirely, Morrison went on. They were extremely long-lived beings who thought in terms of centuries and millennia. Their strategy was always to wait for their enemies to make mistakes or lose patience. The human response had been to out-patience them. Instead of rushing into battle, human forces had established positions around dynasty territory and simply waited. But they had not waited passively. They had used the time to study dynasty culture so thoroughly that they understood it better than the dynasty members themselves. We learned their poetry, their philosophy, their ancient traditions, Morrison explained. Then we began composing poetry in their classical styles, but with themes that suggested patience was less valuable than growth and exploration. Mira's compound eyes reflected her growing horror. You convinced beings who had lived for thousands of years to abandon their fundamental approach to existence. We showed them that there were more interesting ways to spend eternity than waiting for enemies to defeat themselves, Morrison confirmed. The dynasty's greatest poets and philosophers began writing about the value of change and adaptation. Their entire civilization transformed its worldview within a single generation. The pattern was becoming clear to all three students, and it was more frightening than simple military conquest. Humans did not just defeat other species, they understood them so completely that they could guide cultural evolution in whatever direction they chose. Morrison showed them reports written by human military historians who had analyzed their own methods. Lisa Chen, one of their strategic analysts, had written, "We do not defeat enemies, we solve them like equations. Once we understand the variables that drive an opponent's behavior, victory becomes inevitable." But the most disturbing example is probably the pacification of the Draconian Empire, Morrison said, accessing files that made even him look uncomfortable. This operation took place entirely without traditional warfare. The records showed something that seemed impossible. The warlike Draconians had ruled through fear and military might for over 1,000 years. When they had attacked human colonies expecting to add another species to their slave roster, humans had responded with something unprecedented. We did not fight them at all, Morrison explained. Instead, we infiltrated their society at every level and became their most trusted advisors. The operation had taken 2 years of careful preparation. Human agents perfectly trained in Draconian culture and psychology had assumed positions throughout Draconian government, military, and educational systems, not as spies or saboteurs, but as genuinely helpful advisors who solved real problems for Draconian society. We improved their agriculture, advanced their medicine, streamlined their bureaucracy, and enhanced their technology, Morrison said. Everything we did made their lives better and their civilization more prosperous. But every improvement had been carefully designed to make military expansion seem less attractive. Better agriculture meant Draconians no longer needed to raid other worlds for food. Advanced medicine reduced the population pressures that had driven territorial conquest. More efficient government meant they could manage their existing territory more effectively rather than needing to expand. Within 2 years, the Draconian Empire had peacefully transitioned into the Draconian Research Consortium. Morrison continued. They stopped conquering other worlds not because we forced them to, but because they no longer saw any reason to do so. Crix's crystalline skin had turned so dark it was almost black. They never realized they had been conquered. From their perspective, they had simply discovered better ways of organizing their civilization, Morrison confirmed. They were grateful to us for helping them evolve beyond their primitive warrior culture. The most chilling aspect was that the transformation had been genuine. The Draconians truly had become more prosperous and happier after abandoning their military expansion. Their art flourished, their science advanced rapidly, and their citizens enjoyed better lives than they had under the old empire. "This is not conquest," Mira said in a whisper. "This is something much more frightening." Morrison nodded grimly. The Galactic Council came to the same conclusion. They commissioned the most comprehensive psychological study in galactic history to understand what humanity really was. He showed them excerpts from the classified report that had led to humanity's permanent exclusion from galactic affairs. The document, compiled by xenopsychologists from dozens of species, reached conclusions that had terrified every government in known space. Humans possess cognitive patterns that are fundamentally different from all other known sapient species. Morrison read from the report. Their approach to conflict resolution involves complete restructuring of opposition societies rather than simple victory or defeat. The report detailed humanity's unique three-phase approach to warfare. First, tactical adaptation far exceeding other species' capabilities. Humans did not just counter enemy strategies. They developed entirely new forms of warfare with each engagement, often within days or weeks of encountering new opponents. Second, comprehensive intelligence gathering that went far beyond military targets. Human commanders did not just study their enemies' weapons and troop movements. They understood their dreams, fears, cultural values, and deepest psychological motivations. Third, post-victory restructuring aimed at permanent pacification. Humans did not just defeat enemies. They transformed them into allies so thoroughly that former opponents became grateful for their defeat. The report's final conclusion was unanimous, Morrison said quietly. If humanity were allowed to participate in regular galactic warfare, the eventual result would be cultural homogenization of all sapient species. Zeph's tentacles had gone completely gray with fear. You mean everyone would become human? Not biologically, Morrison clarified, but culturally, philosophically, and organizationally, yes. Every civilization we encountered would gradually adopt human methods of thinking and social organization. The implications were staggering. The rich diversity of galactic civilization, hundreds of different species with unique cultures, philosophies, and ways of organizing society, would slowly disappear as human. Influence spread through successful problem-solving and cultural improvement. The Galactic Council realized that this would happen not through force or oppression, but through genuine improvement, Morrison explained. We would make every civilization we encountered more prosperous, more efficient, and happier, but they would also become more human. Mira's voice was barely audible. The ban is not to protect others from you. It is to protect galactic diversity from your success. Exactly, Morrison confirmed. The Council's greatest fear was not that humans would destroy galactic civilization, but that we would perfect it according to our own vision of how societies should function. The three students sat in stunned silence as the full scope of the situation became clear. Somewhere in their galaxy lived a species so effective at warfare that their very participation would fundamentally alter the nature of all other civilizations. Morrison looked at each of the three students carefully, seeing the fear and confusion in their expressions. He had reached the most difficult part of his explanation, the final piece of information that would make them understand why humanity's isolation was considered necessary by every major government in the galaxy. There is one more thing you need to know, he said quietly. The real reason I am here at this academy. He activated the holographic display one final time and showed them a document that bore the official seals of the Human Colonial Administration. It was his mission briefing, classified at the highest levels of human government. My people have grown concerned about our isolation, Morrison explained. For over 2 centuries, we have been cut off from galactic civilization. We are allowed to trade and engage in cultural exchange, but we are forbidden from participating in the political and military affairs that shape the galaxy. Crix leaned forward, his crystalline form reflecting the light from the display. So you were sent here to learn about galactic warfare and politics? Not exactly, Morrison replied. I was sent here to understand why our isolation continues to be necessary. My government hoped that perhaps the restrictions could be modified or reduced over time. He showed them reports from human colonies that had grown frustrated with their limited role in galactic affairs. Human settlements were prosperous and peaceful, but they felt excluded from the larger community of sapient species. Some of our political leaders believed that the restrictions were based on outdated fears, Morrison continued. They thought that perhaps humans had changed, or that other species had grown strong enough that human influence would not be as overwhelming as it once was. But Morrison's investigation at the Academy had led him to a disturbing conclusion. Not only were the original concerns still valid, but humanity's isolation had actually made the potential problem worse. During our 2 centuries of separation from galactic affairs, human civilization has continued to develop, he explained. Our methods of understanding other cultures have become even more sophisticated. Our ability to solve complex social and political problems has advanced significantly. Zeph's tentacles were pulsing with worried patterns. You mean humans have become even more effective than they were during the original conflicts? Much more effective, Morrison confirmed grimly. And we have had 200 years to study galactic civilization from a distance, learning about every species and culture without them knowing the depth of our analysis. He showed them examples of human research that had been conducted during the isolation period, detailed studies of alien psychology, comprehensive analyses of different forms of government and social organization, and theoretical models for how various species might be guided toward more efficient and peaceful societies. If humans were allowed back into galactic affairs now, the transformation would happen much faster than it did 2 centuries ago, Morrison said. We understand the galaxy far better than we did when we were first restricted. Mira's compound eyes reflected her growing horror. How much faster? Morrison hesitated before answering. Our analysts estimate that unrestricted human participation in galactic affairs would result in significant cultural homogenization within 50 years. Complete transformation of most major civilizations within a century. The 3 students sat in shocked silence. The timeline Morrison described was terrifyingly short in galactic terms. Most species measured significant cultural changes in millennia, not decades. But surely other civilizations would resist, Crix protested. They would recognize what was happening and fight back, would they? Morrison asked sadly. Every species we encountered in the past became grateful for our influence. We do not conquer through force or deception. We help other civilizations become better versions of themselves. According to human definitions of improvement, he showed them psychological profiles that human researchers had compiled for major galactic species. The Nexari, with their natural strategic thinking, would be attracted to human organizational efficiency. The Valdorians, with their crystalline logic-based culture, would appreciate human problem-solving methods. The Thessians, with their rapid information processing, would embrace human technological integration approaches. Every species has psychological and cultural characteristics that would make them receptive to human influence, Morrison explained. We have spent 2 centuries learning exactly how to appeal to what each civilization values most. Zeph's tentacles had turned completely gray. This is why you are really forbidden, not because of what you did in the past, but because of what you could do now. The Galactic Council reviews humanity's status every 50 years, Morrison confirmed. Each time their conclusion is the same. Human capabilities have continued to advance, making unrestricted contact even more dangerous to galactic diversity. But there was an even more disturbing aspect to the situation. Morrison showed them classified communications between human colonial governments and Earth's central administration. Some human settlements had grown impatient with their isolation and were beginning to develop unauthorized contacts with nearby alien civilizations. These colonies believe they can interact with other species on a limited basis without triggering the cultural transformation effects, Morrison said. They think they can be helpful neighbors without fundamentally altering alien societies. But Morrison's research had convinced him that this was impossible. Human psychology made it inevitable that any sustained contact would eventually result in the same patterns of cultural influence and transformation. We cannot help ourselves, he admitted. When we see problems in other societies, we instinctively want to solve them. When we see inefficiencies, we automatically develop improvements. When we see conflicts, we naturally work toward permanent solutions. The most chilling example was a recent incident at a human colony near Nexari space. Human settlers had noticed that their Nexari neighbors were struggling with food distribution problems during a natural disaster. Without thinking about the implications, the humans had helped develop a more efficient system for emergency resource allocation. The Nexari were grateful and began asking for advice on other organizational challenges, Morrison explained. Within 6 months, they had restructured their entire planetary government based on human suggestions. They did not even realize how dramatically their society had changed. Mira's voice was barely a whisper. And this happened without any deliberate intention to influence them? That is the most frightening aspect, Morrison confirmed. Humans do not need to consciously try to transform other civilizations. Our natural problem-solving instincts automatically lead to cultural influence and eventual absorption. Morrison showed them his final report, which he would be delivering to human authorities when he returned to Earth. His conclusion was unambiguous. The restrictions on human participation in galactic affairs must remain in place indefinitely. Not only should the current limitations continue, he said, but they should probably be strengthened. Human colonial expansion should be more carefully controlled to prevent unauthorized contact with alien civilizations. The three students realized they were witnessing a moment of historical significance. Morrison was recommending that his own species accept permanent isolation from the larger galactic community, not because humans were evil or aggressive, but because they were too good at solving problems. "What will happen to your people?" Crix asked quietly. "Will you remain isolated forever?" Morrison's expression was deeply sad. "Perhaps someday the galaxy will be ready for full human participation, when other species have developed strong enough cultural identities to resist transformation, or when diversity can be preserved through other means." "But that could take thousands of years," Zeph protested. "Or tens of thousands," Morrison agreed. "Human civilization will have to find meaning and purpose within our own territory. Without the broader galactic community, we would naturally want to help and improve." As Morrison prepared to leave the academy and return to human space with his disturbing conclusions, the three students understood why Professor Galt had been reluctant to discuss the topic. The knowledge they now carried was a heavy burden. They knew that somewhere in their galaxy lived a species capable of solving almost any problem, ending almost any conflict, and improving almost any society. These beings were not monsters or conquerors. They were perhaps the most genuinely helpful species that had ever evolved, and that was precisely why they had to remain isolated. Over the following days, Crix, Zeph, and Mira found themselves unable to concentrate on their regular studies. Every lesson about galactic warfare and interspecies relations seemed different now that they understood what humans could do. They watched Morrison's transport depart for the Sol system, carrying with it the recommendation that humanity's isolation should continue. None of them spoke as the ship disappeared into hyperspace, but all three were thinking the same thoughts. When Professor Galt asked them to file a report on their independent research project, they wrote a simple recommendation. The current restrictions on human participation in galactic affairs should remain in place indefinitely. Their reasoning was brief, but compelling. Not because humans posed a threat to galactic civilization,